So, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I'm your host, and I'm here with our resident expert to unpack something really mind-bending today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we're definitely going completely off the beaten path with this one.
For sure. Because, imagine you're standing in front of one of those massive megalithic stone walls, right? Like in the highlands of Peru.
Right, or even, the Osirian down in Egypt.
Exactly. And you're looking at these stones that weigh upwards of 100 tons each.
It's just massive.
And they're cut with such terrifying precision that even today, thousands of years later, you cannot slide a razor blade between the joints.
You really can't.
And for decades, traditional archaeology has just stood in front of these walls and struggled. We get theories about, like, copper chisels and wooden rollers.
Yeah, tens of thousands of slaves just pulling on ropes.
Right. But when you're actually standing there looking at the sheer scale of it, that linear escalator of human history, the one that says we went from cavemen to skyscrapers in this neat straight line, it just feels completely broken.
It does break down because, honestly, you're looking at an archaeological landscape that is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Muddy waters, I like that.
Yeah, well, the physical evidence on the ground simply does not match the primitive tools we're told those early builders possessed. You can't carve granite like butter with copper.
Which is exactly why today we are setting all of that aside. We are stepping into a bizarre, murky, but incredibly compelling alternative historical framework.
Very compelling.
It's often referred to in the source material as religion in the gray. And just to be clear for you listening, this isn't your standard textbook history.
Not at all.
This narrative pulls heavily from literal interpretations of ancient texts, global mythology, and specifically things like the Book of Enoch.
Right, which is a big one.
Yeah, and for those who might not know, Enoch is an ancient apocalyptic Hebrew text that didn't make it into the canonical Bible.
Right, largely because it goes into, well, really extreme detail about celestial beings coming to Earth and sharing forbidden technology.
Which is wild. And it also weaves in concepts from Gnosticism, which centers on secret knowledge of the material world.
Yeah, exactly.
So our mission today is to explore this framework where Atlantis isn't like a sunken city with a fish god, but a global, high-tech ideological blueprint.
It's a completely different paradigm.
It is, because what if the people who built those massive stone walls weren't primitive at all? What if they lived for centuries? And getting into the Enoch stuff, what if they weren't entirely human?
Right, and to even begin to grasp this, you have to temporarily discard the conventional timeline of human development.
Just throw it out the window.
Pretty much. Because the sources present a pre-flood or antediluvian civilization that is characterized by absolute global unity.
Wow, absolute unity.
Yeah, we are talking about a world with a single shared language. And that language functioned like a frictionless API for technological sharing.
Like an open source network for the whole planet.
Exactly. But the core tension of this entire framework is that this immense planet-spanning infrastructure was built entirely on human self-worship.
Okay, so not worshiping a deity.
No. It's a chronicle of how unchecked intellectual ambition built an absolute utopia of engineering. And ultimately, how the mechanics of a natural cataclysm were used as a divine planetary factory reset to just systematically dismantle it.
A planetary factory reset. Man, okay, let's unpack this. Because every utopian empire needs an architect, right?
They do.
And in this narrative, that founding father is a figure we usually associate with a very different, much smaller story of exile. And that's Cain.
Right, the biblical Cain.
Yeah, in the standard narrative, he's the first murderer cast out to wander the wasteland. But in this alternative framework, he doesn't just survive, he becomes the original father of high-tech civilization.
He writes the blueprint.
He writes the blueprint for what we are calling Atlantis.
And that requires a massive paradigm shift in how we understand that word Atlantis. Because under this framework, Atlantis is not an island that fell into the sea.
Right, forget the Aquaman stuff.
Yeah, completely. Atlantis is a religious ideology. It is a cultural and architectural paradigm. The sources make it clear you do not travel to Atlantis.
Yeah.
You practice Atlantis.
You practice it. That completely flips the script. So instead of a creator-focused faith, where early humanity is, humbling itself before the heavens, praying for rain, hoping they survive the winter, what does practicing Atlantis actually look like?
Well, it looks like the deification of human achievement.
Worshipping themselves.
Essentially, yes. The Atlantean religion elevated mathematics, science, engineering, and warfare to absolute divine status.
Wow.
Mastering the earth became the central religious focus. So by sculpting geography, manipulating water currents, and mastering the natural elements, humanity began to view its own craftsmen and engineers as divine beings.
Because they could control the environment.
Exactly. They weren't looking up for salvation. They were looking down at their blueprints and their forges.
And Cain is the one who sparks this whole thing. The lore says he transitions from a wandering exile to this towering patriarch. And he starts teaching indigenous hunter-gatherer tribes how to build what the texts call unfathomable cities.
Unfathomable to them, certainly.
Right, we're talking about walls and fortifications that early humanity couldn't even conceptualize. But the real game changer here, the piece of technology that actually turns this philosophy into a global empire, is metallurgy.
Specifically bronze.
Yes, bronze. Explain how big of a deal that is.
It is impossible to overstate the importance of bronze in this narrative. Because before Cain, early humanity was utilizing very basic methods. They had like small fire forges.
Basically glorified campfires.
Yeah, exactly. They could maybe manipulate soft metals like copper or gold, which have very low melting points. But they were primarily relying on stone, wood, and bone.
Right.
And copper is relatively easy to find and melt, but it's terrible for a weapon or a heavy tool.
Because it's so soft.
Right. If you hit a piece of limestone or even a human bone with a copper axe, the axe bends. It loses its edge immediately.
It's just a shiny rock at that point. You can't conquer a continent with a shiny rock.
You really can't. But what Cain introduces is the complex high-heat process of smelting true bronze.
And that's an alloy, right?
Yes. And this is not a small step. True bronze requires alloying copper with tin.
Okay.
And tin is actually quite rare.
Yeah.
It requires a really advanced knowledge of geology just to locate it.
Right, you can't just pick it up off the ground.
No. You need mining infrastructure to extract it, you need supply chains to transport it, and then you need furnaces capable of reaching and maintaining incredibly specific high temperatures to combine it with the copper.
So it's an entire industrial process.
Absolutely. The narrative calls this the most superior advancement the world would ever know.
Let's really think about the impact of that. Because I like to compare Cain bringing true bronze smelting to these early hunter-gatherer tribes to, like, someone dropping a fully functioning smartphone, complete with a solar charger, into the Stone Age.
That's a great analogy.
Right. It's an immediate, staggering technological imbalance. You've got rival tribes armed with flint spears and wooden clubs, and suddenly, Cain's descendants are walking out of an industrial forge with advanced bronze weaponry.
It changes everything.
A bronze sword will shear right through a wooden club. A bronze shield will shatter a flint spear. It's not just a new tool, it's a monopoly on violence.
And that monopoly fundamentally transformed warfare. The Atlantean ideology, warfare wasn't just, tribal skirmishing over a local watering hole.
Like fighting over a couple of deer.
Exactly. Warfare became a disciplined, refined, and industrialized practice. It was a pillar of their religion right alongside their mathematics.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And this staggering technological edge allowed Cain's descendants to conquer outward and forge absolute superpowers.
And the sources point to specific locations for these, right?
They do. The framework identifies these early empires flourishing in places that later became known as Egypt, Ethiopia, Gunung Padang in Indonesia, Lepenski Vir in Europe, and Crete.
So it's a completely global phenomenon.
Yes. These weren't isolated settlements. They were global superpowers that utterly overwhelmed the unprepared primitive societies around them.
Which has got to have a massive psychological ripple effect. I mean, if you are the civilization with the bronze and your armies are effortlessly steamrolling everyone else on the continent, you're going to start believing your own hype.
Oh, the ego inflation must have been off the charts.
Exactly.
And it laid the groundwork for a brutal, unchecked global hierarchy. It set a precedent where power, and essentially the divine right to rule the planet, belonged exclusively to those with the best engineering.
If you had the bronze, you were God.
Practically, yes.
Yeah.
If you possessed the bronze and the metallurgy, you were a god to those who did not.
But wait, I have to stop you there. Because having the right metal isn't enough on its own.
What do you mean?
Well, you can hand me the finest bronze chisel ever forged, and I am still not going to be able to build you an unfathomable city with 100-ton blocks.
Oh, right.
I just don't have the skills. You need the time to perfect how to use that tool.
Yeah.
And that brings us to what I think is the most mind-bending biological advantage of this pre-flood world.
The lifespans.
Yes, extreme human lifespans.
This is where the narrative sharply diverges from our modern biological reality. Because in this era, humans lived for several hundreds of years.
Which is just so hard to wrap your head around.
It is, but that single biological fact completely rewrites the mechanics of collective learning. It changes the transfer of knowledge entirely.
How so?
Well, it created what the texts describe as a massive, uninterrupted database of science and engineering.
Let's unpack the math on that because it's fascinating. We have this modern concept, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000-hour rule.
Right. For mastery.
Exactly. The idea is that it takes roughly 10,000 hours of deliberate, intense practice to achieve true mastery in any field.
Which is a lot of time.
It is. If you work a standard job, that equates to maybe 5 to 10 years of full-time dedication. If you live to be 80, you might master 2, maybe 3 complex skills in your lifetime before your body or mind starts to degrade.
Sure.
But in this framework, if we apply that to someone living 300 or 400 years, their 10,000 hours is basically just their freshman orientation.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Their baseline for competence would look like unattainable historical genius to us.
Seriously.
Let's walk through the daily life of a master craftsman in this era, just to picture it.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Imagine an individual whose sole focus, their religious devotion within this Atlantean framework, is celestial masonry.
So cutting the giant stones.
Yes. For the first 50 years of their life, they might not even touch a chisel.
Wait, 50 years without carving a single stone?
Exactly. They might just study the geometry of stone, the load-bearing physics of granite, the complex astrological movements of the stars, so they can perfectly align their eventual structures.
50 years of pure theory. That's a lifetime for us.
Right. And then, for the next 100 years, they practice the physical act of carving.
A whole century of practice.
They move from simple cuts to absolute cellular-level mastery of the craft. They learn to understand the crystalline grain of the rock as intimately as they understand their own heartbeat.
And here's the crazy part. After a century and a half of doing this, they aren't retiring.
Not even close.
They still have another 200 years to innovate. They have 2 centuries just to experiment, to push the absolute boundaries of what stone can do.
And they are doing this while working alongside an apprentice who might be a century old themselves.
Think about what that means for institutional memory. Today, an apprenticeship might last, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, and knowledge is constantly lost between generations.
Yeah.
People retire, they pass away, techniques are forgotten.
But in the antediluvian world, a master and an apprentice spend centuries working side by side.
They are preserving and refining complex technical skills over vast timescales. There's no degradation of information. They don't have to pass the baton to a new generation every few decades.
And because they had that single shared global language you mentioned earlier.
Right, the frictionless API.
Yeah. Because of that, they weren't geographically siloed. They were constantly communicating, trading, and probably even stealing these highly refined ideas across the vast networks of these empires.
Which completely explains a really persistent mystery in alternative archaeology. We touched on it at the very beginning, the megalithic superiority.
Oh, right. Let's talk about that.
It's a recurring observation at many ancient sites across the world, whether you're in South America, Egypt, or the Mediterranean. The older foundational megalithic construction is vastly superior in its technical quality compared to the newer construction built directly on top of it.
Which totally defies that escalator theory of history.
Completely.
It shouldn't be that the oldest layer of a ruin is a 100-ton block cut with laser precision, and then the layer built 1,000 years later is just a bunch of uneven river rocks mortared together.
It makes no sense conventionally.
Right. That indicates a massive devolution of capability.
But under the framework of religion in the gray, that devolution makes perfect logical sense.
Because they lost the lifespans.
Exactly.
Right.
The degradation of construction quality post-flood is a direct result of losing this antediluvian engine. After the planetary reset, the scattered subsequent civilizations stumbled upon these massive surviving megalithic foundations.
And they just set up camp.
Yeah, they built their own cities on top of them. But they lacked the 3 crucial ingredients of the old world.
Which were?
The extreme longevity to master the craft, the shared global language database to coordinate the engineering, and the highly refined intellect to replicate the ancient quality.
So what we consider highly guarded tribal knowledge today.
To them, it was just a foundational scientific framework. It was continuously optimized by the exact same living individuals over multiple centuries.
It changes your entire perspective on ambition. I mean, if you know you have 400 years to live, you aren't building a wall to last for your grandchildren. You are building a wall to last for a geological epoch.
You're building for eternity.
And this centuries-long refinement of skills didn't just produce, beautiful stone masonry. It allowed mankind to completely domesticate their environment.
They weren't just building standalone temples. They were building sprawling, highly engineered megacities.
Megacities
Right.
in the pre-flood world.
Yes. The pooling of all this centuries-deep knowledge resulted in immense, heavily organized state projects.
What kind of infrastructure are we talking about?
We're talking about large-scale urban centers that completely rivaled and in some ways surpassed later eras. These weren't chaotic, sprawling mud hut settlements that just grew organically around a river bend.
No urban sprawl.
No. The streets were laid out in precise geographical and astrological order. And perhaps most shockingly, the framework details that they had indoor running water inside dwellings.
Wait, like actual indoor plumbing?
Yes. And highly advanced municipal sewage systems.
Municipal sewage. I mean, that is a massive, massive leap. If you compare that level of advanced hydraulics and sanitation technology to modern infrastructure, it's wild.
It is.
It took humanity millennia after the flood to rediscover how to manage urban sanitation and water distribution on that level. We really didn't see it widely implemented again until the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century.
And you bring up hydraulics, which is actually the defining characteristic of these ancient cities.
Really? More than the big stones?
Oh, definitely. The mastery of water was central to the Atlantean architectural blueprint. They didn't just rely on passive rivers, they executed massive canal-building projects.
So they were rerouting the water.
Completely. They understood water pressure, gradients, and fluid dynamics to a degree that allowed them to manipulate the landscape entirely. They controlled seasonal flooding. They engineered vast irrigation networks for crops. And they managed complex aquatic transportation routes. Water mastery was the lifeblood of the empire.
And that ties directly into how they managed to feed these megacities, right? Because you cannot have a massive urban population densely packed into a city grid without a bulletproof, endlessly reliable food supply.
Impossible.
If the crops fail, the city riots and the empire collapses. So how did they solve that?
The lore points out that they solved this by developing a highly standardized solar luni calendar.
Okay, a calendar. But how does that prevent starvation?
Well, this is a crucial pivot point for their society.
Hmm.
You have to remember, agriculture in the early days of humanity was a massive, terrifying gamble against nature.
Right. One late frost, one missed rain cycle, a swarm of locusts.
And your entire tribe starves to death over the winter.
Exactly.
But the antediluvian civilizations used their centuries of observation to transform agriculture from a gamble into a highly disciplined, exact science.
Because they had hundreds of years of data collected by the same farmers.
Exactly. And because of the Atlantean ideology we discussed earlier, this science actually became a religious practice.
So they worshipped the process of the harvest.
They did.
Mm.
The solar luni calendar wasn't just, for keeping track of holidays. It was a highly complex astrological tool that predicted planting cycles, seasonal shifts, and weather patterns down to the exact day.
That's incredible, but knowing when to plant only solves half the problem. You also have to make sure the soil doesn't die.
Right, soil depletion.
Yeah, and the lore mentions that this calendar worked in tandem with engineered nitrogen-fixing soils, advanced crop rotation, and selectively bred supergrains.
Which is fascinating.
Let's break that down, because nitrogen fixing is a very modern agricultural term.
It is.
Yeah.
Plants require nitrogen to grow, but they cannot pull it directly from the air. They have to absorb it from the soil.
And today, we rely heavily on synthetic chemical fertilizers to achieve that, right?
We do. But this framework suggests the pre-flood empires engineered the soil biology itself.
How?
They may have used specific bacteria, complex companion planting on a massive scale, or advanced composting to constantly inject nitrogen back into the dirt.
So they created self-replenishing soil?
Essentially, yes.
Right.
That allows you to farm the exact same plot of land for centuries without depleting it.
And then you combine that with the supergrains.
Right. Crops that have been selectively bred over hundreds of years by the same master agriculturalists for maximum yield and drought resistance. When you combine all of that, you effectively dissolve the cycle of famine.
They achieved an absolute architecture of abundance.
They really did.
And if we think about the psychological and sociological impact of that, I mean, put yourself in the shoes of an ordinary person from that era. For you listening, imagine this. Maybe you're a member of a lingering primitive tribe on the outskirts of the empire. or just a common laborer.
Okay.
You walk into one of these mega-engineered metropolises, you see 100-ton stone walls that reach into the sky, you see water-defying gravity flowing indoors, you see waste miraculously disappearing underground, and you look out over endless, perfectly gridded fields of super grains that literally never fail year after year, decade after decade.
It would be overwhelming.
Wouldn't you genuinely believe that the city leaders who built and controlled all of this were actual literal gods?
You wouldn't just believe it. Your entire reality would reinforce it.
Because they control life and death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the text suggests it was actually more sinister than just tricking the local populace with good infrastructure. It wasn't just awe. It was absolute engineered dependency.
How so?
The intellectual elite held the monopoly on the calendar, the metallurgy, and the hydraulics. By erasing famine and completely domesticating the wild earth, the leaders cemented their status as living gods.
They made themselves indispensable.
Yes. And because of their shared global language, this wasn't an isolated phenomenon. They functioned as sister civilizations.
Oh, like a network.
Right. The empires in what we call Egypt, Ethiopia, and Crete weren't just experiencing parallel thinking. They were utilizing an exported, perfectly standardized blueprint for survival and absolute dominance.
It's like the ultimate franchise model for civilization.
That's a good way to put it.
You just copy and paste the solar luni calendar, the hydraulic canal systems, the bronze smelting forges, and boom, you have a god-tier mega city.
A fully operational empire in a box.
Exactly. But here is where the narrative takes a massive, really dark turn.
It does.
Because these leaders weren't just seen as gods because they had great technology and an abundance of grain. According to the framework, an actual physical genetic intervention occurred that literally made them part divine.
Which completely fractured the biological reality of the human race.
This introduces the most controversial and, honestly, the most fascinating element of the entire mythos, the arrival of the Watchers.
Yes, the Watchers.
Okay, we need to dive deep into this. Who exactly are the Watchers, and how do they break the rules of this world?
Well, the Watchers are described across these texts as highly advanced celestial beings.
Angels, basically.
In a sense, yes. And they were originally sent by the Creator with a very specific limited mandate. Their job was to monitor and observe early mankind.
To just watch, hence the name.
Exactly. They were supposed to be silent witnesses to human development. However, they defied that prime directive.
They got involved.
Very involved. Instead of just observing, they descended and actively integrated themselves into these human empires.
And they didn't just share a few tips on architecture, right? They altered the actual source code of humanity.
Completely. The most significant and catastrophic way they broke their mandate was by sharing their own genetic code.
They mated with humans.
Yes, they mated with mortal women. Specifically, integrating their celestial lineage with the already highly advanced, aristocratic ancestors of Cain.
So they mixed their DNA with the most powerful people on the planet.
Exactly. And this unauthorized genetic mingling established a brand new, terrifyingly powerful ruling class, the demigods.
And these demigods weren't just regular guys who were, a little smarter, a little stronger.
Right.
The physical descriptions in the sources are striking and totally bizarre. The offspring were towering, regularly described as being between 6 to 8 feet tall, and sometimes much larger.
Giants.
Right. And in a world where the average human was likely much shorter than we are today, these individuals would have been absolutely imposing, just moving like literal titans among men.
But it wasn't just height.
No. The lore says they had bone structures like no other, which gave them immense physical resilience and cognitive processing abilities that far exceeded the smartest ordinary humans.
And what's truly fascinating and deeply disturbing about this genetic intervention is the rigid class segregation that emerged within this demigod lineage.
Wait, there were segregated?
Yes. They weren't all just generalized superhero kings. They were highly specialized, engineered for specific functions.
Engineered, like intentionally.
That's how the texts frame it. The sources note that a demigod was typically engineered either for immense physical labor and battle.
So these would be the physical giants, the ones literally moving the megalithic stones and acting as the unstoppable shock troops of the armies.
Exactly. Or, on the other hand, they were engineered to be pure intellectuals, hyper-calculating masters of complex scientific disciplines.
Interesting.
And it is explicitly stated in the lore that it was very rare to find a single demigod who possessed a dual combination of both immense physical dominance and supreme intellectual capability.
That is such a specific detail. If I'm visualizing this, it sounds like their society was structured almost like a hyper-advanced ant colony or beehive.
That's a great analogy.
You know, you have your massive physically imposing worker and soldier caste, the literal giants, and then you have your hyper-calculating intellectual caste, the scholars, the calendar keepers, the hydraulic planners.
Right.
And all of them, this entire specialized demigod hive, are ruling over the standard, subjugated, normal human population.
That perfectly illustrates how they maintain power. It was a functional, biologically engineered hierarchy designed to optimize the relentless expansion of the empire.
Just absolute efficiency.
Think about it. The intellectual elite caste managed the complex mathematics of the solar lunar calendars. They drew up the incredibly intricate architectural blueprints for the unfathomable cities. And they solved the complex engineering formulas for the canal system.
They were the brains.
Yes.
Mm.
Meanwhile, the physical demigod laborers, the giants, executed these immense state projects at speeds and physical scales that ordinary humans couldn't even dream of.
Lifting the 100-ton blocks.
Exactly. This highly specialized genetic division of labor is exactly how these pre-Diluvian empires maintained such rigid, unyielding power structures. The normal humans were essentially relegated to a permanent underclass.
An underclass of biological inferiority. They couldn't compete physically or mentally.
They stood no chance.
And the Watchers didn't just bring their DNA, did they? They brought what the sources call higher advanced knowledge. They brought forbidden celestial gifts.
They did.
We spent a lot of time earlier talking about Cain bringing true bronze smelting, which kicked off the Industrial Revolution of the ancient world. But what did the Watchers bring that was so much worse?
They escalated the technological capacity exponentially.
How so?
Well, if Cain brought foundational bronze, which was a mastery of earthly elements, the Watchers brought highly advanced metallurgy that went far beyond basic forging.
Like what?
They taught humanity how to manipulate alloys and metals on a level that bordered on the atomic.
Wow.
Furthermore, they introduced advanced astronomy. They didn't just teach humanity how to track the seasons for farming. They gifted a vast, terrifying intellect regarding the deep movements of the stars, the precession of the equinoxes, and the cosmic cycles.
Deep space mechanics.
Exactly. And perhaps most controversially, they introduced sorcery, or what the texts call high magic.
Okay, magic. That always trips me up.
I know, it sounds out of place.
It does. In a society that is so rigidly based on engineering, hydraulics, and metallurgy, how does magic fit into the equation? It feels like we just jumped from science fiction straight into fantasy.
You really have to reframe what magic means in the context of the Atlantean religion.
Okay, help me reframe it.
In this framework, magic and science weren't opposed disciplines. They were two sides of the exact same coin of mastering the earth.
Okay.
Magic wasn't about waving a wand. It was the hyper-advanced manipulation of physical laws.
Like applied physics.
Exactly. It was the mastery of sound resonance to perhaps levitate or fracture those megalithic stones. It was the manipulation of elemental frequencies.
Oh, that makes so much more sense.
Right. And the magicians, heavily influenced by this forbidden watcher knowledge, actively assisted the armies of the great kings right alongside the physical giants. It was all about having ultimate overriding dominion over the physical realm.
That paints a terrifying picture of ancient warfare. I mean, imagine you are a normal human soldier from an unconquered tribe.
It would be a nightmare.
You are facing an army that has advanced bronze weaponry. They are led into battle by 8-foot-tall physical powerhouses who can shatter a boulder with a hammer.
Right.
Their tactics are directed by hyper-intelligent, genetically engineered tacticians. And they are supported by practitioners of high magic who are manipulating the very environment around you using sound resonance.
It's no wonder they achieved absolute global unity. Nobody stood a chance against that combination.
It was a biologically and technologically insurmountable force.
Completely. And, if we step back for a moment and compare this specific Atlantean religious framework.
The washers and the demigods.
Yes. If we compare this era of celestial beings descending, mating with women, and producing specialized demigods with other global myths, we start seeing incredible, undeniable parallels across the globe.
The sources point this out as a key piece of evidence, don't they?
They do, because this story doesn't just exist in a vacuum in one obscure Hebrew text.
Right, it echoes everywhere.
It permeates almost every major ancient culture. Look at the Greek myths.
Oh, yeah. Zeus and the Olympians.
Exactly. Coming down from the heavens, interacting and mating with human women, and creating legendary heroes and demigods like Hercules. beings who possess superhuman strength and slay monsters.
That's a direct parallel.
It is. Or look at the ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh. The great king is explicitly described as being two-thirds divine and one-third human.
Right. And he was an intellectual and physical giant who built massive, impenetrable city walls.
Yes. Then look at the ancient Hindu epics, like the Mahabharata.
Remind me what happens in that one.
It features highly advanced, devastating weaponry, flying chariots called vimanas, and towering demigod warriors.
Wow.
And of course, the biblical accounts in Genesis of the Nephilim, the giants born of the sons of God and the daughters of men.
So they are all telling the exact same story.
In this alternative framework, yes. These aren't just isolated, imaginative fairy tales invented by primitive people sitting around a campfire. They are fractured, inherited cultural memories of this exact, historically real pre-flood era.
It's like playing a game of global telephone over 10,000 years.
That's exactly what it is.
The core historical truth of these specialized, towering demigod rulers and their advanced technology got filtered through different languages, different cultural lenses, and thousands of years of oral tradition. But the massive footprint of the story remains exactly the same.
The core elements always survive.
But here is the tragic, inevitable irony of this entire utopia. Despite all this power, all this genetic manipulation, and all this celestial knowledge, the biological reality eventually caught up with them.
It always does. Biology is relentless.
The divine bloodline of Cain and the Watchers eventually started to thin out, right?
It did. Over the centuries, as the original potent divine bloodline continued to mix with the vast population of ordinary humans, the celestial DNA began to degrade.
It got diluted.
Highly diluted. The subsequent generations of demigods were no longer as tall, they were no longer as intellectually supreme, and they no longer possessed the formidable godlike power of their ancestors.
And what does a tyrannical ruling class do when they feel their absolute grip on power slipping? They panic, they become desperate. The sources mention that they turned to highly destructive, incestuous practices.
They did. It became very dark.
They were trying desperately to concentrate whatever divine DNA they had left in the gene pool. It's the ultimate expression of the sheer hubris of this society.
Outer hubris.
They're biologically engineering themselves, engaging in these desperate, horrific acts just to cling to their fading status as living gods. They completely lost the plot.
They had strayed entirely from any foundational connection to the Creator.
The Creator was completely out of the picture.
Entirely. The entire scaffolding of their civilization was rooted in the philosophy of what man could do for man. It was an unchecked, tyrannical wickedness driven by the absolute worship of human ego, scientific capability, and genetic superiority.
Which is the definition of the Atlantean ideology.
Exactly. And this brings us to the inevitable, violent climax of the narrative.
The reset.
Yes. This combination of global unity, a shared single language, pooled technological knowledge spanning centuries, and unholy genetic manipulation.
Yeah.
It created a system of evil that was essentially too efficient to be allowed to continue.
It was a perfectly optimized engine of self-destruction.
Yes.
Which triggered the final response from the Creator, the total systematic dismantling of the board, the divine factory reset.
Because the absolute cohesion of humanity was the fatal flaw.
Explain that. Why is cohesion a flaw?
Well, the sources paraphrase a profound biblical concept here.
Yeah.
If humanity, possessing an inherently flawed and selfish nature, achieves absolute global unity and a single language without the moral compass of the Creator, then absolutely nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them.
We'll just keep escalating.
Right. They will eventually destroy themselves or corrupt the planet beyond repair. So the planetary reset wasn't just a punitive flood, it was a necessary mechanical intervention to dismantle human self-worship and physically break those unified, unshakable power structures.
And the mechanism used for this reset is fascinating, because this framework blends ancient biblical literalism with a very specific and highly debated modern scientific theory.
The Younger Dryas impact theory.
Yes. The sources point directly to the Younger Dryas. Explain what that is.
In this narrative, the flood wasn't just 40 days of heavy rain falling from the sky.
Right, because rain doesn't erase a global infrastructure of megalithic cities.
Exactly. The cataclysm was initiated from the cosmos.
Yeah.
The theory suggests that a massive fragmented comet entered Earth's atmosphere roughly 12,800 years ago.
Okay.
But crucially, these weren't single, solid asteroid strikes that leave massive, distinct impact craters. Like, the one in the Yucatan that wiped out the dinosaurs.
So no giant hole in the ground.
No, these are continent-wide airbursts.
Airbursts. Let's explain the physics of that for you listening, because it is terrifying. So the comet fragments don't hit the ground. They are detonating in the atmosphere under immense pressure, raining down extreme heat and kinetic shock waves. It's like the Tunguska event in Russia, but on a global scale. I can't even imagine what that looked like from the ground, the sky literally catching fire.
The destruction would be incomprehensible. The constant bombardment from these multiple atmospheric airbursts caused immense, violent shifts in the planet's equilibrium.
What kind of shifts?
According to the sources and the proponents of the impact theory, this triggered sudden extreme temperature fluctuations, massive global wildfires, and a pole shift, drastically altering the Earth's axis.
A pole shift. Wow.
But the most critical consequence to the mechanism that actually caused the flood was the sudden, rapid melting of the massive global ice sheets that existed at the time.
And here is a detail from the text that completely changes the picture of the flood, and it explains why we can't find these cities today.
The sea levels.
Yes. Before this event, during the height of the pre-flood era, the sources state that global sea levels were roughly 400 feet lower than our modern shorelines.
And 400 feet is an astronomical difference in geography.
It's huge.
It exposes a massive expanse of coastal property and continental shelves. And historically, human civilization always builds near water.
Of course.
Those exposed coastlines are exactly where these megacities, these thriving metropolises, with their advanced canals, their ports, and their hydraulic networks, were built.
So they were basically in the lowlands.
Yes. And as the ice sheets melted from the immense heat of the comet impacts, millions of cubic miles of water poured into the oceans, and those sea levels began to violently rise.
But it wasn't an overnight event, right? When we hear the flood, we usually picture a giant Hollywood-style tsunami that just washes over the entire globe in an afternoon and wipes everyone out instantly.
No, and that is a vital logical distinction in this narrative. The reset was a gradual, agonizing transition.
How long did it take?
The sea levels rose continually and violently over a period of hundreds of years as the ice caps continued to destabilize and melt.
Hundreds of years?
Yes, and this slow-motion apocalypse provided the necessary window of time for someone who was prepared, most notably the figure of Noah, to react.
Right, because Noah, like the others in this era, lived for hundreds of years.
Exactly. He was able to witness the gradual, unstoppable inundation of the coastal world. He had the centuries required to build the massive engineering project of the Ark, preparing a means to survive the final, total submergence of the old world.
Let's connect this back to the bigger archaeological picture.
Yep.
Because the sources use this very specific, violent phrase regarding the advanced global infrastructure.
Liquefied and buried.
Yes. They say the megacities, the intricate hydraulics, the advanced sewage systems, the bronze forges, they were all completely liquefied and buried under miles of sediment. Is that why modern archaeology struggles so much to find the wheels and gears of Atlantis? And instead, we only find these massive, unmovable stone bases.
Precisely. That is the exact argument made by this framework to answer the critics of alternative archaeology.
It makes sense.
Think about the sheer unimaginable violence of a pole shift, combined with rapidly rising floodwaters, continental tectonic shifts, and the immense heat of comet airbursts.
It would act like a planetary blunder.
A perfect description. The intricate metallurgy, the advanced bronze tools, the fragile, complex solar lunar calendars, the wooden structures, the records, even the complex municipal sewage pipes. All of it would be pulverized, oxidized, liquefied, and buried under deep, deep layers of mud, ash, and sediment.
It's a complete physical erasure of human ego.
Yes. The reset was intelligently designed to physically clear the blueprint of the old world. The only things heavy enough, dense enough, and robust enough to survive that level of planetary trauma were the deepest, most massive megalithic stone foundations.
The 100-ton stones.
The very stones cut by 300-year-old craftsmen and moved by demigod laborers. Those stones remain as the silent, indestructible footprints of the antediluvian era, leaving us to puzzle over their impossible precision today. Everything else was washed away.
It's chilling when you really think about the mechanics of it. The creator had to be that thorough, that devastating, to shift humanity back to a center line of faith.
To force them to look up again.
Yeah, to force the survivors to look up at the heavens again in humility, rather than looking at their own reflections in their advanced bronze mirrors.
And the final piece of this reset wasn't physical, it was linguistic.
The Tower of Babel concept?
Right. The sources note that the introduction of multiple languages post-flood served as a vital divine system of checks and balances.
Because it breaks the API.
Exactly. By breaking the single shared global language, you break the frictionless API of knowledge transfer. You shatter the global pooling of engineering and science.
It slows everything
It
down.
was a mechanism explicitly designed to prevent mankind from ever easily achieving that dangerous level of absolute global unity and rapid technological escalation again. It introduced friction. It slowed the spread of coordinated global dominance to ensure the cycle wouldn't immediately repeat.
Man, what an incredible journey this has been. So if we try to synthesize this massive, sprawling timeline for everyone, we started with Cain, exiled into the wasteland, and he decides to forge global empires using the game-changing industrial technology of true bronze smelting.
Right.
We looked at a society operating on a completely different biological clock, where 300-year lifespans allowed master masons to refine complex architectural skills for centuries, creating a massive shared database of engineering knowledge that completely defies our modern understanding of progress.
And we examined the extreme utopian infrastructure that resulted from that pooled knowledge. Global megacities with advanced hydraulics, indoor municipal plumbing, and a highly engineered solar luni calendar that worked with nitrogen-fixing soil to transform agriculture into a disciplined religious practice.
They effectively ended famine.
They did. And in doing so, they elevated human rulers to the unshakable status of living gods.
Then the narrative gets truly gray with the arrival of the Watchers. Celestial beings breaking their prime directive, sharing forbidden, hyper-advanced knowledge of metallurgy and magic, and injecting their own genetics into the human bloodstream.
Creating the demigods.
Exactly. Creating a highly specialized, towering demigod ruling class, divided into intellectual planners and physical giants who further subjugated the normal human population into a permanent underclass.
Which ultimately culminated in a society utterly obsessed with the Atlantean ideology, the worship of its own human achievements and genetic superiority.
A society of tyrannical wickedness.
Yes, that was so efficient it required a divine factory reset. Triggered by a fragmented comet, the younger Dryas airbursts melted the ice sheets, raising the global sea levels by 400 feet over centuries, liquefying the technological wonders of that age and leaving behind only the heaviest megalithic stones and the fractured global myths of giants and floods that we still share today.
It's a staggering, cohesive framework. And for you listening, I think the core takeaway here is how this narrative seamlessly attempts to weave together all these disparate anomalies that traditional history ignores.
It ties it all together.
The scattered myths of Greek demigods, the impossible precision of ancient Peruvian masonry, the global ubiquitous stories of a great flood in this view, they aren't isolated coincidences or primitive fairy tales. They're all surviving pieces of a single, highly technical blueprint from an era that prioritized human ego over its creator.
It absolutely forces us to look at the foundations of history through a completely different lens. Not as a primitive crawling start out of the mud, but as the shattered ruins of a forgotten, terrifying pinnacle.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to just mull over while you're driving or doing the dishes.
I love these.
If the pre-flood world reached a point of absolute global unity, a shared single language, and immediate frictionless technological sharing right before their reset, look at our world today.
Oh, man.
Look at the internet. Look at the instant translation of languages breaking down borders. Look at the rise of artificial intelligence, our globalized infrastructure, and our own modern obsession with pushing the boundaries of genetics, extending human lifespans, and worshiping our own technology.
It sounds very familiar.
What unshakable megalithic foundations are we building right now? Are they deep underground server farms? Are they concrete nuclear waste bunkers? Because if the cycle truly repeats, and the human ego once again requires a reset, what will be the only things left of us for the next civilization to find when the waters recede?
That is a profoundly sobering question to end on. It puts our own definition of progress into sharp perspective.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the gray. We love unpacking these complex sources with you and exploring the edges of the map. Until next time, keep questioning the timeline and keep looking at the stones.